Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome back to another episode of The Tide Machine. I am Charles Branch with Michael Southern. Got a lot to get into this week. Going to be diving into the Louisiana Monroe series, which also has one of the darker days of Alabama football history that we'll get to touch on from the 2007 season. Also want to talk about legendary Alabama defensive player Leroy Jordan and his unfortunate passing over the weekend. But before we dive into all that, um, as Coach Saban would have said after the Louisiana Monroe game in 2007, a catastrophe happened last Saturday down in Tallahassee. And, the goal of this podcast or the vision of what we wanted for this podcast was to look back at Alabama history and games that we've had against our upcoming opponents. And we'll definitely do that with Louisiana Monroe. I know the guys at the M3 show, Mac and Matthew and Josh did a lot of recapping as far as what happened with Florida State, but there's a lot of the Alabama fans out there with an opinion as far as what happened and how they like maybe some changes to happen. And so to start off, Michael, wanted to give you the opportunity. I know you'll also take it from a historical standpoint as well, but just kind of share your thoughts from Saturday, thoughts about the future, maybe not only for this season, but what you'd like to see or what you think the rest of the DeBoer era could look like. And maybe if you need to, just get some things off your chest from what we witnessed this past
Well,
Saturday.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack from just ironically just one game. I mean, one game into a long season. If you want to take this, we can take this a couple of different ways. So let's take it the first way. We know why the fans are upset. Well, no one wants to lose, but it's the way that the team lost. That's why everyone's frustrated. The team didn't look prepared. The team didn't show effort. They just look lost. And again, it happened against an offensive coordinator who seems to have your number, and that just grates the fan base even more. I mean, most fans are reasonable on certain things. If the team comes out, looks like they're prepared, they give effort, they don't make stupid penalties, they're not there just lollygagging in the backfield. If the other team just had their day, they can live with it. They don't like it, but they can live with it. So as far as season openers are concerned, this is the fifth time that I remember losing a season opener for Alabama football. I don't remember 75, 76, but I can go all the way back to 84. I can go back to 90, 2000, 2001, and of course this past year. Now, if you want to know the historical perspective and those four prior that I remember, the odds aren't in Alabama's favor for having a great season. Your best outcome for two of those years were Gene Stallings' first year when they went 7-5, and of course the other one is Dennis Franchione when they went 7-5. I'm not saying that Alabama's going to go 7-5. I'm just telling you what history tells you right now. So they got a lot of work to do. I mean, actions speak louder than words. The press conferences yesterday weren't very reassuring. So we're going to have to see something on the field this week. And you're not going to be able to tell a lot with no disrespect to Louisiana Monroe. I mean, if Alabama comes out and wins by 35, have we still really learned anything? So maybe you'll know a little bit more against Wisconsin, and then you'll definitely know what happens when you go to Georgia. Now, to go back into the historical side again, if they come out against Louisiana Monroe and just are terrible again, then you really have learned something. Then yes, warning signals are on, and this season there's a lot to be concerned about.
Yeah, so I don't fault anybody that is upset, and everybody deserves to be upset because film doesn't lie. And especially in this social media age, film is repeated over and over again with the lack of effort that you maybe have seen from some of the players. And I know a lot of comments that were going around our household watching the game, and I'm sure through other households of, like you said, team just looking unprepared, not being able to get calls in and things like that. So I totally understand everybody's disappointment like that. But we are also into the 14th game of the Kalen DeBoer era. And there's nobody under a greater microscope in college football than Kalen DeBoer and this Alabama team because of the success that we have gotten to experience under Coach Saban and what he built at Alabama. Couple things that when I was thinking back to, or just kind of trying to put a bow on the game, but also looking again from a historical perspective of where has this Alabama program been and where is it currently? I first started with our 11 games against Gus Malzahn as either a head coach or an offensive coordinator when he was going up against Coach Saban. And in those games, he averaged scoring 25 points a game. So we gave up 31 Saturday with a lot of guys who I think it's fair to say were not giving 100% effort on a lot of plays. I know a lot of people have been on Coach Womack for a long time. And again, I understand because they didn't look prepared. But I still believe there's an opportunity for those guys to rectify this and to be a lot better because I felt like we saw those changes as the season went on last year, especially after the Vanderbilt game, that the defense really woke up and played a lot better after that. I know there's a lot of talk about, that we're 5-5 in our last 10 games, or all the games that have been a lot closer than what we've been accustomed to during Coach Saban's era. I went and looked back from 2013, which was the AJ McCarron senior year, going for the three-peat, all the way up to the COVID season 2020, which I think is the best of Coach Saban's teams at Alabama. During the regular season, I only use the regular season because when you get into bowl games and playoffs and championships, you're typically playing teams of the same caliber, so you would have a lot closer games. During the regular season, during that 8 season span, we had 13 games that were decided by one score or less, and we were 8-5 in those one score games. I mean, we really blew people out, got accustomed to the domination that really defines Coach Saban's era. After that 2020 season, the next 3 years, 2021, 2022, 2023, we also had 13 one score games. So you went from having 13 one score games in 8 seasons to having 13 one score games in 3 seasons. Now the record was really good. We were 10-3, but we've kind of lost some of that domination and just ending games in the first half, whether it's against good opponents, bad opponents. The streak of winning games against unranked opponents ended in that last 3 years, losing to Texas A&M and M in College Station. We had a lot of games that we were up big and just weren't able to close out. So I want to take it from the perspective that Kalen DeBoer did not step into the revving machine that was the Coach Saban dynasty in the late teens and 2020. There unfortunately have been some cracks, but because we had the greatest football coach of all time, he's able to plaster those cracks, and we were able to keep this thing going. I think the game from this past Saturday is very similar to what we're going to talk about here pretty soon about the 2007 Louisiana Monroe game. That this is an inflection point, and it can go the way that it did with Coach Saban, where people got their heads on straight, understanding that they needed to get with the program and follow the leadership, or it's going to go the way that it kind of went for Florida State last year, and where they went 2-10. So it's one game. There was a lot of other top 10 teams that lost that they didn't look as bad as us. I understand Clemson, Texas, Notre Dame. But that also reminds me Notre Dame made the national championship game last year, losing to Northern Illinois in their second game. And so, what I would say, as somebody that just has this platform, is this is a great time for Alabama fans to show up, be loud, stay for all 4 quarters, show your support. Even though the guys may not deserve it after the Florida State game from their performance, we still all love this program. We're all very invested into it. And I would say stick with it because I do believe it's going to turn around. Greg Byrne didn't make. I don't think Greg Byrne makes bad decisions. That may be very arrogant of me to say, but that this is going to be the most scrutinized hire of his career. And I know he vetted Coach DeBoer and he vetted a lot of guys. So I still have belief this is going to be righted, but of course we're going to find out, like you said here, in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, the page in the history book is going to turn in about 10 to 11 weeks, and everyone's going to know how the story ends, whether it's good, bad, or just indifferent, because there's a lot of ways this thing can spin. I mean, I agree with you. Fan base, don't give up. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. Have patience. give the coaching staff an opportunity. Now, again, it's like we talked about, you know, if you see it again and again and again, then you really got a problem. If we're still seeing the same issues that we saw last year by the middle part of this season, then that tells me the players aren't listening to the coaching staff. And if the players aren't listening to the coaching staff, it doesn't matter what's going to happen. That's a sign of just program instability, and that is a big concern because we've seen it happen. We've seen it crumble. We saw the Dubose collapse in 2000 after they came off an SEC championship team in 1999. Had all the ingredients and talent there to everyone thought go on a great run, compete for a championship, and it just blew up. One afternoon there in Pasadena, and they never recovered from that. It was a very difficult season to watch. It was painful. It was embarrassing. Look, there's programs and schools out there have been waiting 16 years, 17 years for this opportunity to really, really take their revenge out on Alabama, to make fun of Alabama, to do all that. So we're in a vulnerable position, the most vulnerable we've been in literally in 16 and a half years, the most vulnerable position that we've ever been as far as how you want to recruit, how you want to play, how you want to be remembered. The Alabama intimidation factor is gone at the moment. No one fears Alabama right now. They all want to play Alabama. So this is where the coaching staff, this is where it all comes together. So they need to show up and put something behind it. Or again, yeah, look, all these talks about buying coach out, that's ridiculous. Not going to happen. You got $69 million. Why it's not going to happen? Doesn't mean you can't change coaching staff. Other people pieces on there, but the head coach is not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't imagine that changing one bit, unless something just really, really strange happens. But from a financial standpoint, Alabama can't afford to buy out a coach and pay him $69 million. They are not a Texas school. They are not rich in oil money. They don't have a billionaire benefactor. So, Kalen DeBoer's not going anywhere. Now, can you make changes on the staff? Absolutely. Can you make other changes if they need to be? He's going to have to do that. This is a very pivotal time, and I know we're going to talk about it with Louisiana Monroe, but to go back to the old Pulp Fiction line, this is a moment of clarity. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here over the next 6 to 7 weeks, because by then we'll have a good picture of what's going to happen.
Well, and like you said, it's definitely amplified because there are so many fan bases around the country that are glad to go grab their shovels and dig the hole to bury the Alabama football program in.
Absolutely.
There are so many analysts that are out there. The game, not only was the game insufferable to watch from the effort, um, it just boggles my mind as much as ESPN and Disney struggle that they still have a guy like Joe Tessitore calling their games in the ABC slots. You would think that for high profile SEC games or college football games, you can find somebody better than him. Um, as I shared with you, and this may be saved for next year as we talk about moments and recapping games. Game got even worse for me when I was at my parents' lake house and Bruce Pearl decided to show up on the dock. But I will say Bruce Pearl is very good at saying "Roll Tide." He's definitely working on his political side right now. But we'll save that. We'll save more of the detail of that story for another day.
Well, he can go ahead and announce his candidacy mid-October. How
Exactly.
about that?
Exactly. All right, so as we transition to Louisiana Monroe, which is another dark day in Alabama football history, I don't think even though a lot of good came from it, I think it's fair to say that I think Coach Saban has said it's probably the worst loss in his tenure, not only in Alabama, but maybe in his entire college coaching career. It was a really low point for the fan base. We had started off the 2007 season really strongly, lost to Georgia in overtime, lost to Florida State in Jacksonville, Florida, had rebounded, had beaten Tennessee, had a tough game at home against LSU, had a tough loss against Mississippi State, and was kind of going through a stretch of where we just could not win games in November. And who comes up on the schedule? Louisiana Monroe for senior day, who you expect you'd be able to beat. I looked at it, an article earlier, we were a 24 and a half point favorite.
That's right. We
And of
were.
course, it didn't go our way. So, Michael, I'll let you start it off. What do you remember from that day, and what do you want to get into?
So I was covering the game for the Tuscaloosa News during that point in my life. I was still covering there. I was in the press box. I was there. I was there for post game, all of that. If I remember correctly, of course, you had some player suspensions. This was off of the textbook seven scandal, you would say, that was unveiled after the Tennessee game. You had that going on. DJ Hall was suspended. We thought for the whole game, but then he comes running out in the third quarter. Just a very lethargic, dismal, no energy, no motivation, nothing from the team in that game. I remember after it happened, and I went in for the post game, and we were waiting for the Alabama players to come in. You remember our middle linebackers back then. It was Orlando McClain and Darren Mustin. And I remember Darren Mustin came in there. He it looked like he I think he actually had been crying just a little bit because he looked that way. And he came in and someone asked him one question. He looked at all of us, didn't say a word, lowered his head, turned around, and walked back out. He didn't make one single comment because he was so embarrassed by what happened to the team. But the focal point here is that is, if not the lowest, then one of the lowest points in Coach Saban's career. And what did he do with it? He was determined that nothing like that is ever going to happen again because I can assure you that Alabama team from 2007, when they started the season the next year against Clemson in 2008, the Alabama team that got off the bus, both physically and just by their demeanor, looked nothing like that team that came off the field in 2007. I guarantee you he lit a fire into that staff. Remember, they went out and got Mark Ingram, Julio Jones, Terrence Cody. That team looked nothing like 2007. They played nothing like 2007. Remember, he swapped out offensive coordinators, Major Applewhite out, Jim McElwain in. So that coaching staff and Coach Saban took a negative and turned it into one of the greatest positives ever. Now, I'm going to ask you this: as far as the worst loss in Saban's career, where would you rank that 2000 loss to UAB? So when he was at LSU, is that worse than Louisiana Monroe or equal?
That's a really good question. I personally would say the Louisiana Monroe loss was worse because I do remember LSU at that point was really, really struggling as a football program. I don't remember a ton as far as LSU's talent, but I do remember the 1999 Alabama LSU game in Tuscaloosa. That's when we had Sean Alexander and Andrew Zal and Freddie Millens and Tyler Watts. And up until that point, we had lost the Louisiana Tech game, kind of thought the season was over in a sense.
That's
Thought
right.
Dubose was going to get fired in the middle of the year. They come out, then beat Florida in the swamp. I think broke Florida's 50-game winning streak down in Gainesville, and had a lot of high hopes as far as Sean Alexander in the Heisman. Had a lot of high hopes as far as national championship. Played Tennessee at home, lost that game 21-7, which I remember a play from that game that would not be able to happen in this day and age of college. Freddie Millens is returning the a kickoff after Tennessee ties it up 7-7. He runs out of bounds and he's basically where the benches are on the sidelines. And Tennessee player comes and decleats him, and there are no flags on the play.
Mm,
The officials just decided to let our guys get beat up. And where I'm going with that is because I remember in that LSU game in 1999, Andrew Zal didn't play. Sean Alexander played very sparingly because they were so beat up from that Tennessee game. I don't think either one of them played against Southern Miss, is who we would have played the following week against Tennessee.
that's right.
But we basically had to have a goal line stand against a not a very good LSU team to continue to have an opportunity to win the West, which we would eventually do, beating Mississippi State at home the next week. But to come all the way back to your question, I think the loss against Louisiana Monroe was worse for Saban's career than the UAB loss because LSU was so down at that point as a football program.
The one other thing too that was so hurtful in that '99 game against LSU, even though Alabama won, you lost Marvin Constant. That was
Mhm.
a career-ending injury, and he was one of your stud inside linebackers, and that was a huge blow to lose Marvin Constant on that
Yeah,
one. So I thought the world of Marvin. I remember watching him in high school play, and he was a great player. And to lose him, and he never came back. That was a tough blow. That was a tough blow.
it was a tough blow. Um, So that's why I would go with the Louisiana Monroe game. And So when you were covering the game, and I was going back, I remember DJ Hall being suspended, and like you said, we thought it was for the game, and it ended up being just the first half. Do you remember if Terry Grant was suspended for the first quarter of that game? Because
Oh,
he finished the game with 21 carries, but I went back and watched it, and he was not in the first drive on the offense. Our running backs for the first drive, or at least through the first quarter, were Jonathan Lowe and Jimmy Johns. Not the sandwich place for all the younger fans.
no, the other,
We actually
yeah.
had a running back named Jimmy Johns.
Yeah, well, and for those who may not remember, Jimmy Jimmy John Jimmy John came with a lot of hype. Everyone had thought a lot of him. He he was a very athletic player, but you just never could find the right spot for him. He played quarterback in high school, but he really probably wasn't a natural quarterback. And then you thought he could play running back. He had times when he was pretty strong, but he just wasn't fluid enough. Then they were like, could he play linebacker? So Jimmy never found a good spot based on his athleticism. And of course, we know he had some off the field issues too. With Terry Grant, oh, I'm trying to remember if Terry. That's a good question. I can't remember if Terry was part of that textbook issue or not. He might have been. I can't say for sure because that part I just don't remember about Terry Grant that year. Now, just think about this from a historical perspective. In that 2007 season that Saban took over, Terry Grant, who was very small, very fast, but very small, is your lead tailback. The next year you upgrade. Now you've got Mark Ingram and Glenn Coffey becomes your number one back. So again, a huge talent upgrade and physicality upgrade between 2002 and 2008. Now, I'm not saying Alabama's going to do that this season. I don't know what that defense is going to look like in the next couple of games, but that's something they're going to really have to turn the dial up on as far as the physicality and line of scrimmage. Because if they don't, if you think Florida State could push you around, you got some other teams coming that are really going to push you around if you can't tighten up.
Well, I'll always remember Terry Grant because my first game as a student, obviously Saban's first game at Alabama in 2007, playing Western Carolina. We got the ball basically at midfield, had returned the kit to that point. First offensive play of the game, I think, was a toss sweep, but I know Terry Grant went 50 plus yards for a touchdown. So it was pretty cool that the Saban era started with a touchdown on the first offensive play. May have been a little bit more poetic if you had a defensive touchdown for the first play, but I remember I was up in that's when the first season, I believe, where they started splitting up ticket packages for freshmen.
Oh, okay. You had
So
to pick them.
I was not in the student section. I was up in the upper deck, in the opposite end zone of where Terry Grant would score. He would be going to the student section. But I still remember that. And it was pretty cool seeing how the field opened up in that first play of the season, first play of Coach Saban's tenure at Alabama was a 50 plus yard Terry Grant touchdown run.
And look, Terry was extremely fast. There's no doubt about that. Just not a big back, so he had durability issues, but and not your typical Nick Saban back, but he was fast. He was very fast.
Well, and that was part of the problem in that Louisiana Monroe game, late in the game, is we got into the red zone and had 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 handoffs to Terry Grant that got no yards. He just wasn't a big enough guy. And to what you were talking about, physicality on the lines, the offensive line should have been able to get more of a push that Terry Grant could have gotten a few yards. But
They
at,
didn't.
at that point, Louisiana Monroe was in the game. They were winning, playing probably with a lot of adrenaline and made the plays that they needed to. Going back to Jimmy Johns and Will, do you remember Will Oakley, number 7,
Hmm.
wide receiver? I don't know if this is the right way to describe them, but I feel like they were kind of cult heroes within the fan base. As far as everybody wanted to see more of Will Oakley, they wanted to see more of Jimmy Johns. They wanted to see these guys that they thought could really make plays for the team and didn't really understand why they weren't in there making plays. Well, of course, in that Louisiana Monroe game, we're up 7-0. John Parker Wilson throws an out pattern to Will Oakley, probably 20 yards down the field at the 40-yard line. Ball tips off his hands, intercepted. Louisiana Monroe takes it all the way back to the 1 inch line. They punch it in on the next play, and got them back in the game, tying it up at 7-7. And then late in the fourth quarter, when it was 21-14, we're back in the red zone and hand off to Jimmy Johns, and he fumbles the ball, I believe, on like the 13-yard line. And I remember as fans kind of talking about it. We came away from that game kind of, you know, like we don't really know what should be happening. Whatever, we think we know these guys should be playing. We think this should be happening. We think this should happen. We're all great at Monday morning quarterback, but we those guys that we wanted got put in those spots and they weren't able to deliver in those spots in a game that really should, as we continue to talk about, should have never been in question for any Alabama team.
Well, one of the things that fans forget, and I'm guilty of this too, we sit there and clamor, why aren't they playing? Why aren't they playing? And you brought up a very good evidence as far as Jimmy Johns, well, locally like that. They were given the moment and they didn't come through. Well, there's a pretty good chance that's exactly what happens in practice too. A fumble here, a drop pass here, and there's a reason they're not out there. All right. The coaches deem them that they're not ready. There's something that's holding them back. So, everyone says, well, they should be playing this person. Well, there's a reason they're not playing that person. They have seen it in practice, they have seen it on film, and there is a concern. Now, can things change? Absolutely, you can do that. But there is, I guarantee you, evidence or a pattern or history or something along the way for everyone to make a decision. So, yeah, Jimmy Johns, I bet you fumbled quite a bit whenever he was at running back. And that's why he didn't play as much as he did, even though he's a big, strong, bruising type back. You can't hold on the football. Why are you, no need for you to be out there? Look, you want to do that when we go back to the national championship game when Alabama doesn't have John Mechie and they lose J-Mo, and you put some of those other receivers in there that they're highly recruited, heralded. They should be playing. Well, what do? They drop every pass Bryce Young puts right in their hands. You know, you can't tell me that if Alabama didn't have a healthy Williams and also John Mechie, they don't get George again, but they didn't, and the backups weren't ready. And that's usually the case with backups. Very rarely do you get the situation where the backup truly comes in and all of a sudden just explodes. So uh, the only time I can think of that right off the top of my head, Gary Hollingsworth, 1989. He did come in. He came in for a quarterback injury and he turned into all-time quarterback that season. So, but the odds say that that usually doesn't happen.
But look at the Florida State game, not only from this past weekend, but the one we look back at 1974 when Alabama was down to their third and fourth string quarterbacks and had to
Yep.
squeak out that game. So, yeah, there's a reason why their guys are starters, and with this NIL area, that it's why you got to try to stay healthy because you don't have the depth that you used to anymore, where guys are going to look for playing time or looking for more money at other programs. So I know following that season, I mean, that Louisiana Monroe score was plastered all throughout the Alabama complex. It was in every player's locker, in the weight room and all that. I don't think you could probably put a number, not only how many times that game was referenced at Alabama, but how many times lower opponents going into Power Five or Power Four conferences referenced, hey, Louisiana Monroe did it to Alabama, we can do it today. Or, as Auburn used a couple years ago after losing to New Mexico State, this is our Louisiana Monroe moment. We're going to rise from the ashes, after losing to New Mexico State like we did. And they're finding out it's not as easy to do. But there's no telling the amount of times that game has probably been referenced since 2007, not only in Tuscaloosa, but throughout the country as it relates to college football.
Well, I think the Louisiana Monroe and then of course Appalachian State against Michigan. There's a couple of ones that you can point to as far as that. Look, I was there with the Mike Shula era when Northern Illinois and Michael Turner came in and they beat Alabama in 2003. So that was a 2003 team coming off the Franchione year that looked like they were going to be pretty strong, gave Oklahoma a good run, and they lose to Northern Illinois. So this coaching staff, they have got to get this under control. They really do. I mean, I can't emphasize that anymore because you will see what happens if they don't. We've already seen it. And again, I'm not trying to be a naysayer or predict doomsday, but the reality is this is a pivotal moment. How they respond and react is going to be critical to the success or failure of this season.
Well, let's get some positive vibes out there, which can come from the last time we played Louisiana Monroe in 2022. That was a 63-7 victory over Terry Bowden and Louisiana Monroe, which interesting, maybe last thing on the 2007 game. Louisiana Monroe scored 21 points in that game. We've played Louisiana Monroe four other times, and they've scored a total of 14 points. And both of those touchdowns have come in the second quarter. So maybe that's some foreshadowing. If Louisiana Monroe puts some points up in the first quarter, then maybe everybody can start worrying a little bit because something's happening that doesn't typically happen. But the 2022 game, obviously it was a game that we dominated start to finish. It was coming off of the really close game with Texas. It was a game that we probably needed to rebuild some confidence after not looking great there. What I wonder from that game, um, Will Anderson had an interception return for a touchdown for our second score of the game. The third score of the game was a Malachi Moore block punt that he ran in for 3 yards. So we had three touchdowns, but the offense had only had two possessions. One was a touchdown drive, and the other Bryce Young threw an interception. And I just wonder, would Coach Saban have been upset that the defense was scoring so many points and not allowing the offense to get into a rhythm and having to keep those guys in longer and be called out for running up the score or something like that? Because Bryce Young and the offense was still playing in that game deep in the third quarter when we were up 42-7. And I know it was just to try to get those
Get
guys to
reps.
sneak and get rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to get reps. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens this Saturday, how the game flows, and I want to see. The biggest frustration here in the last year and a half with the performance of the team, with the current coaching staff, is the uncertainty of which team you're going to get. And nothing will drive fans more crazy than that. I mean, that honestly, that's one of the biggest knocks that Tommy Tuberville had at Auburn. He can upset number one Florida and then turn around and lose as a double-digit favorite to Alabama and get humiliated at home. So that's what drives people crazy is the uncertainty. I mean, they don't want the highest of highs paired with the lowest of lows, and that's what we've gotten these last 10 games. So that's a concern. You have got to smooth that thing out. So can they play to their own level and standard of themselves, not to the level of the opponent? And we haven't seen that yet. They have not proven that they can do that on a consistent basis. So that is one area that is a legitimate concern. And until you see it, you have no evidence to believe that we can do it. So, I mean, the proof's in the pudding now. You can't talk about it. You have to come out and do it.
One other thing that I want to mention, and again, trying to put some positive vibes out there. The last time that I felt like the media was as hard on the Alabama dynasty as it is today was probably when Alabama lost at home to Ole Miss in
Oh yeah.
2015. That was for whatever reason, Cooper Bateman started that game. Jake Coker came in. The very next game Alabama had was Louisiana Monroe at home, and we ended up winning 34 to
To
nothing.
nothing. Yeah, 34 nothing.
Jake Coker got the starting role again. I know there's a lot of people on Ty Simpson. I want to say this about Ty Simpson. Didn't have to question his effort level on Saturday. He was putting his body on the line. He was playing hard for his teammates. Maybe didn't make the quickest or the best decisions on every play, but I did not question his effort level at any point during the game.
Well, if you'd have told me that before the game, if you just said Ty Simpson's going to pass for 250 yards with two touchdowns and no turnovers, I would have said, I think Alabama wins easily. But if you told me he had to do it in 43 attempts, then I might have had concerns. So, from that standpoint, yeah, the effort was there. First start, hostile environment. There's room for improvement. But anyone who's saying Ty Simpson's the reason Alabama lost that game, that's not true. Believe me, it was a team effort to lose that game. So there are a lot of things that need to be shored up. Um, Louisiana Monroe, again, not if Alabama plays like they shouldn't be a test. But again, let's see how they handle this. I'm encouraged in the fact, though, of course, it's a home game. So if there's one thing that they have proven, they play obviously better at home. South Carolina was standing from last year, but we'll see. Want to see some intensity, some execution, and some hustle from this team when they come out this Saturday.
Absolutely. But look, it was a sad Saturday, from start to finish. Obviously, especially when we got the news in the morning about Leroy Jordan's passing, just an absolute Tide legend. Um, it still blows my mind that he had 31 tackles in a football game. But Another guy that's just represented the Alabama program well, not only from when he was playing in the early 60s, but his time at the Cowboys was on one of Coach Bryant's first national championship teams. Michael, what do you remember as far as Leroy Jordan, just as far as hearing him or just hearing stories about him or just what you feel like he meant to the Alabama program?
So I think Leroy Jordan meant a lot. Obviously I didn't get a chance to see him in person. I remember passing him in the press box when he's visited in the past. Never got a chance to talk to him, but I've heard so many through secondhand stories of what a class act he was. And look, just you said it. You have 31 tackles in the Orange Bowl against Oklahoma, in 1963 in front of President Kennedy. That's an accomplishment. And that 1961 national championship team, look, Pat Trammell was the leader on offense. So you had Leroy Jordan anchoring that defense, which only allowed like 2.27 points a game. They had six shutouts. The most points scored against them that year were 7 points. I mean, you talk about incredible. And don't forget this, Leroy Jordan played Iron Man football. He played center and middle linebacker. So he wasn't by today's standards, he's tiny. He was like, what, 6'1, 230, 220, but he played center and then he played middle linebacker, and you have 31 tackles against Oklahoma. That's just incredible. He meant a lot to the university and to the Dallas Cowboys. I believe he's in the Ring of Honor. He's got like the single game tackle record there too. And a very successful businessman with a lot of real estate ventures here in Tuscaloosa as well. So, very he is one of a foundational player in Coach Bryant's resurrection of the program. And for the younger generation, I hate that they're not as familiar with him. So I'm glad that we're talking about him because he deserves to be recognized, remembered, and honored at this moment.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he was an inductee into the Cowboys Ring of Honor. I think he was the seventh inductee and actually the first inductee of the Jerry Jones era for the Cowboys, as far as that I read. And I also saw this quote from Coach Bryant, and I think this probably sums up Leroy Jordan the best. He's one of the finest football players the world has ever seen. If runners stayed between the sidelines, he tackled them. He never had a bad day. He was 100% every day in practices and in games. That's, that's what the Alabama standard is. And that's what the Alabama standard has been built, not just from the Coach Saban era, but all the way back, I'm sure, to Wallace Wade. And so it's unfortunate that we had guys that couldn't play to that standard last Saturday, but hopefully there's the accountability is for real, and we'll see that this coming Saturday against Louisiana Monroe. Should be a fun day. Obviously, the home opener. It's a 6:45 kickoff. So Club Tuscaloosa or Club Bryant Denny Stadium, whatever the young people call it, will be in full effect with the light show. And got a couple honorary captains, and Jarrett Johnson and Kenny King, both from 1999 to 2002. Michael, do you remember anything about those two guys? I remember Jarrett Johnson very well when he was at Alabama.
Oh, Jarrett Johnson was a great defensive lineman or player there on that 2002 team. He made There were a couple of times he just swallowed running backs. I mean, just stopped them cold at the line of scrimmage. I believe there was one tackle in that 2002 LSU game where they beat Nick Saban's team 31 to nothing. I can't remember what part of the game there was, but he just literally it looks like he swallowed the running back whole. He just disappeared. I mean, he just stopped him cold. That was an incredible performance by Jarrett. He was very, very good on that 2002 team, and Kenny King on the 99 SEC championship team. So glad to see those guys coming back to be honored as the captains for this game. But yes, both very worthy of that and very important contributions to their playing times here at Alabama.
Jarrett Johnson is a part of one of my favorite Alabama experiences of all time being in an Alabama football game. The 1999 SEC championship game where we beat Florida for the second time was a pretty close game throughout, 15-7 going into the fourth quarter. We run a direct snap to Freddie Millens. He goes left, cuts back right, gets a great block from Tyler Watts, goes 71 yards down the sidelines. We're up 22-7. Florida's very next play, Jesse Palmer drops back to pass. Jarrett Johnson tips it. Reggie Grimes catches it, goes 40 yards for a touchdown, tries to jump in the stands. I think he got 2 inches off the ground. But I remember being in the Georgia Dome for that game. And I actually, as a younger child, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, remembering what Florida was. Florida was what Alabama has been. And so the idea that we'd already beaten them in the swamp, I go into every Alabama game, I'm sure as you do as well, like that we're going to win this game. Even when we had those bad years with Shula or Franchione, you still knew what Alabama football was, and you knew Alabama had a chance in every game. And to get to that point in that game where you knew you were going to beat Florida for the second time in the season, and not only that, but for me to really experience my first SEC championship. I had been alive for the 1992 game in Birmingham, but I was 3 years old. So I can tell you Antonio Langham intercepted the pass and ran it back because I've watched replays so many times over the years. But that was I just remember that was a special night, completely shut down the Spurrier Florida offense, completely shut down Jesse Palmer, and was a great moment for that team and a great moment for Chris Samuels and Sean Alexander, how you talked about last week. I mean, those guys were that Alabama team in 1990, and when you took them off as they went to the NFL draft, that 2000 team just imploded on itself.
So, when Alabama lost to Louisiana Tech at Legion Field that year, and everyone thought the world was coming to an end, it was Sean Alexander and those players that brought that team together and put that run. And yeah, to emphatically put the drubbing on Florida after you beat them at their place in overtime, and then you just hammer them in the second half. That was a statement for Alabama. And it's unfortunate they couldn't sustain it into the next year. But that was a very memorable game. I was there covering that one too, and I remember how loud the Georgia Dome was with the Freddie Millens run and the Reggie Grimes. So it was a fantastic environment, a fun time for a lot of people that were there in the old Georgia Dome.
Well, and I expect we're going to have a lot more fun times like that the rest of the season. I'm going to try to speak it into existence for all Alabama fans. So,
Well, I'm right there with you. I that's why I would want that too.
we appreciate. But I guess before we sign off, you have any final thoughts as far as the Louisiana Monroe game this week? What you'd like to see? How you think the game will play out?
Just kind of what we've touched upon before, what I'm going to be looking for. I want to see a team that wants to be there, a team that's hungry, and a team that realizes that they just got embarrassed last week, and there's no place for that. If you play for Alabama, you should never be embarrassed. That's the one thing you shouldn't be. So I want to see some pride. That's what I want to see.
Coach DeBoer, he may have been criticized by some people by saying this, but he's continued to talk about he just wants to see the team cut it loose. And when I think about an Alabama team cutting it loose, I think about the 2014 team when they beat Texas A&M 56 to nothing, and the defense jumping up and down on the sidelines to the music that was going on during the game. I know there's a lot of people that don't like the podcast and the antics and all that, but I do think because of how we played, being timid and being on our heels, especially against a team like Louisiana Monroe, cut it loose and just go out there and play football. Play
I
Alabama
agree.
football. So that's what we're hoping to see. We hope y'all have enjoyed listening to this, even though it's maybe taken some dark turns. I promise. Win or lose, we will be back here next week, and we will be talking about the Wisconsin game, which is not a deep Alabama series between Alabama and Wisconsin, but looking forward to getting to that with you as well. And I know I said it last week, so I hope I'm not, jinxing ourselves or anything like that. But hopefully, looking forward to talking about a win next week too, a little bit. So we appreciate everybody's time joining with us. Please like and subscribe to the Tide Machine. Please like and subscribe to the M3 show if you want more present day Alabama football. And that'll wrap it up for us. So, Michael, roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
The Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.